Oh, hello there. Actually, finally connected. I hope there won't be any further issues with Wi-Fi, but if I suddenly disappear, then that's not my fault. I just need to make my glasses a bit. Oh, there's no one around now. So, yeah, I'm just going to wait a little bit. Hopefully someone actually okay. I don't know if this is someone who's actually going to stick around because I have everything set up for the reading and everything, and just need to know there's someone actually there because I kind of don't want to just sit here and read nothing. Well then. Okay. So, hello? Hello there. I'm hoping that someone's actually here to read, to listen, because I have the reading set up and everything. So, as I said, things that, oh. Okay, if anyone is actually here, they should probably speak up because in a few minutes I'm just going to cancel the entire stream and do it again tomorrow because I don't want to stream to nobody. So I'm just going to wait 5 more minutes, and if nothing happens, then, well, there's no reason to keep the stream up going if no one's going to show up. I know that I didn't announce it but early enough beforehand. I didn't know if I was going to be able to do it or not because Wi-Fi here kept cutting out for a bit, for like an hour. So I didn't know. So yeah. Okay, well, like I said, 4 more minutes. I'm reading this at the moment in the hope that someone's going to show up, and I realize I didn't advertise the stream ahead of time like I should have. I didn't know if it was going to happen or not because of technical difficulties. So yeah, if in the next 4 minutes someone actually shows up, says something in the chat, and like stays, and I can actually start reading. But if there's going to be one person who comes in and then disappears again, never says something, and the viewer count keeps going from 1 to 0 and then back again, and kind of doesn't feel like there's much of a point. Okay, 3 more minutes. I'm already not. I'm just waiting and hoping, but I know it's my fault, my part, my fault, and I mix those together. Okay, two more minutes. Now then, if someone could potentially say something in chat, so I know someone's actually there, versus because I don't know if there's actually real people watching or not, and I kind of just don't want to maybe narrate the next 3 hours because a couple of bots showed up for a second and then left. So I don't know. I'm not trying to be forceful or anything. I just want to know if I should or shouldn't move it tomorrow and actually give much more of a notice beforehand for people. Plus Friday being, Friday, a lot of people have more time. And yes, I know I look very weird when I do this. I do, in fact, look very weird when I do this. So there's that. I mean, I guess if somebody said something, I would know that there's actual people watching. That I wouldn't have mind, having an immediate audience of 2, rather than we have right now. It's just I don't know if anyone's going to watch. I suppose I can give it a go. I don't want to be so dramatic, but yeah. Well, it's 3 now, so I definitely think we're going to actually at least read a bit. We can at least read the stuff that's advertised, so 2 or 3 stories anyway. So let me just quickly go and I haven't done this for a little bit, so let's see, where's the specific page? What the, wait a minute. I have that open. Okay, I just noticed I've had an image from the last one open the entire time. So I have something else I want to show later. But where is the image I was going to? There we go. So screen. This is Xartella by Florence Carpenter Dieudonné. At least that's how I assume it's pronounced. It's on Roy Glassion's library page. So you can do that. Hold on a second, I'm just checking to see. Okay, yes, thank you telling me. So we can actually begin. So this is Xartella. This is basically, years ago I talked about Dieudonné's interplanetary science fantasy novel, Ronda of 33 Years in a Star. This is kind of a similar thing. Well, it's supposedly a fantasy story, but one that she apparently self-published, and which looks like, I don't know in what way. I can guess, given its short length, that it was probably released as a brochure, like something of that nature, like a pamphlet. But I don't have any confirmation of that, so I don't know how that actually looked. So that's just my speculation at that point. So let me just find where it is, and I can start actually reading it if I can remember where I put it here for a reason. There. So Xartella, Chapter 1st. The Desert. The sapphire night slept on the desert's ghostly breast. Our campfires burnt low upon the sands, and wondrous hosts of stars marched across the skies. On one side rose a crumbling pyramid, on the other were the still tents, their striped poles tinged with red from the dying embers. The camels, heaped in ungainly rest, had groaned themselves to sleep. The horses were motionless. Silence had fallen upon the explorers' camp. I had cast myself down upon a pile of saddle clothes and rugs to look a while at the glory of the stars, to glance with an eerie chill at the darkening form of the old stone pile, to meditate upon the mystery which seemed to live with the sands. Someone moved beside me. It was that old stranger who had joined us the day before we left Cairo. He might have been the spirit of the desert. He seemed in such accord with time and place. His tall form was wrapped with a cloak of white wool. A great white turban was on his head. His dark face was earnest and anxious. His eyes, fierce and black, glared beneath heavy brows. "You do not believe in Xartella?" he questioned. I had been told that Xartella was a deathless creature, more than man, who had been seen for centuries in the vicinity of this pyramid. While I had not the slightest faith in these legends, noting the demonstrative expressions in the aged face, I hesitated to speak my skepticism. "I confess, to me there seems insufficient evidence." "Come," interrupted the stranger, "I will prove that Xartella has existed." "An adventure with a maniac," I thought, as I walked beside him. 12 years have passed since the events transpired which I shall relate, continued my companion, noiselessly as we crossed the sands. "I wish to find a certain broken spear handle." Very mad, but likely harmless, I thought. With him I climbed up the rocks until he paused and began to search among the rubbish. "Look, friend," said he, "your young eyes may be able to find the point and part of the handle of a spear." With assumed diligence I searched until I did find the spear. When it was withdrawn from the sands in the starlight, we could see When it was withdrawn from the sands in the starlight, we could see that the two parts, one of which he carried, united perfectly. It is the very spear, my spear," he said excitedly. "Now let me tell you of Xartella." We sat upon the crumbling stones, and as the stars paled for dawn, I heard this story. "Xartella, Xartella." When first I heard that cry rise from the foot of the pyramid, it was white noon. The air shimmered like a veil above the hot surface of the stone. The waste of sand was blinding as it billowed into distance, broken only by those fragments of dead empires which marked their own graves. In unbelief I had come with the others to search for the lost daughter of one whore, who was considered to be the wealthiest merchant in Cairo. The maiden had been for months infatuated or hypnotized by Xartella, and had been watched constantly to prevent her flying across the desert to his home. At last she had escaped her guards. Immense rewards were offered, and I thought I might find the foolish lady. So it chanced that there we all stood in the blistering moon, when in an instant's time all doubt vanished, for there stood Xartella at the foot of the pyramid. No wonder that they called him a god, a man so majestic that not even that mass of stone towering above him could dwarf him into human insignificance. Robed in fabric wrought over with gems, from head to foot he blazed like another sun. Beneath his antique crown was a face grand, dark, strong. It might have borrowed its repose from the Sphinx, its glory from an eternity, its cruelty from a demon. When the gaze of those wondrous deep eyes struck mine, I could not move. I felt myself grow chill. I tried to call out, as did all the others, "Xartella," but my lips were cold and trembled. I could utter no word. Then the mystery looked away. I breathed again, moved, and called Xartella with the rest, but the others hastened forward to capture him. Capture Xartella, capture the stones of the pyramid, capture the loneliness of the desert. The Arabs were right. He was more than human. He might be 1,000 years old, 10,000 years old. When he looked with those terrible eyes across the plain, of which the very legends had been stolen by time, into what splendors of memory did the ruins lead him? What was that ancient glory of which he was left the only existing miracle? There was stern, supreme majesty on his face. There was mysterious menace in his taper bronze hand, uplifted to the sun. There was a cloud of white, a dazzle in her eyes. Xartella stood not at the foot of the pyramid. No one was there. The brilliance had vanished. No more should I see that glorious face. It was gone. A yell of rage rose from the company. Together men rushed to the spot where he had stood, searching in the sands for print of his foot. They hammered at the moveless blocks of stone and pried great slabs of rock from the dust, as if they thought the mighty man had digged himself a grave. Incantations and prayers mingled with beast-like howls of rage. and they had all seen him, and he had escaped us all. Through the weary day we searched until the parting kiss of the sun. The red light fell across the grey-white plains, and the wide plain was grey no more. In lines of scarlet and in lakes of golden mist the air slept shining. Hilltops burned crimson for palms purpled slow in death of day. Then I saw moving far off on the sands a white-robed form. Hastily I raised my glass. Toiling among the purpling vistas was Vor's weary daughter, my horse, Xartella, Xartella. He stood again like a fire-red star upon the summit of the pyramid. His dazzling majesty as he stood in the sun made me forget War's wandering daughter. Like a swarm, the Arabs crawled up the steps of rock. Among them was I, who looked up at the radiant prize, then back at the demoniac faces as one python head after another peered above the terrace, each countenance stamped with the same ferocious determination. Was not Xartella afraid as he looked down from his surrounded standing place? How could he escape? They were not here to be foiled. They were closing the ring around him. More than 2/3 of the distance of the summit was passed. They were all well armed. Once more that fell gaze caved me. It was dizzy, moved heavily as one moves in a dream. I was dizzy, moved heavily as one moves in a dream. I saw others clasp their eyes. Some leaned against the rock to rest. A stagnation seemed to fall upon them. They moved not forward. Then I heard a defiant shout. A derisive laugh came down to us. Some few lifted their heads to look. There was a blaze of red light, as if the gorgeous sun had shattered into fragments. No man stood upon the summit of the pyramid. Xartella was gone. At once rose the stricken ones. The blinded began to see. The trembling began to grow ferocious. I found myself still weak and clumsy. I leaned upon my spear, this very broken spear. The shaft was pressed into the crevice between the rocks. As I looked bewildered at the place where the flames had flashed, suddenly turned the stone upon which I stood, and I fell into the depth and darkness. As I scrambled to my feet, the heavy stone swung into its place, shutting out the last ray of evening light. I knew that I was a prisoner within the mighty walls, alone, forgotten, with only a broken spear in my hand, already weary, already thirsty. Something told me I was Xartella's prisoner. At first I gave myself up to frantic desperation. After a while I regained sufficient self-control to consider, resolutely remembering that delirium was destruction. Carefully I examined the walls until I found one narrow passage. A strong current of cool air made me hope that there was some outer door. For some time I proceeded so steadily and evenly that I felt encouraged. Then something crashed in the blackness, covering me with dust. Instinctively I turned back. A great stone had barred the passage. Whether it was a door or merely an accidental falling of rock I could not tell. I cried out in horror, then rushed out blindly, madly. No return now. The corridor was my fate. I seemed to see the sunny courts of Cairo. I was tortured with thirst. I could hear those fountains plashing under the trees. The corridor was growing lower, narrower. I could not go back. I crawled on my knees. How close it was. The current of air had ceased since the stone fell. If I lifted my head, it struck the stone. I thought that soon I should be crushed by the weight above. I crawled like a snake. I lifted my head a little. The rocks were not there. I rose. There was plenty of room. I reached my arms about and touched no walls, and in the darkness danced and laughed because there was space in which to die. Then it seemed there was a tinge of light, but I scarce dared trust my eyes. It became brighter, and I was obliged to believe it was light. Soon I found a fountain of cold, clear water nestled in a vine-veiled recess. Further on I could see the glow of lamps. One danger was past. What now? Chapter I was resting absorbed in speculation as to my best course, when close beside me passed the white-robed form of War's daughter. A slow to seem she in that black realm. With wealth of yellow hair, she seemed not the woman of Egypt. She resembled not the women of Egypt. Her face and form were perfect, marvellous, her beauty, eyes, a hand and hue and texture like the waxen leaf of a lily, clad with a silver cloth veil. The shoes were lost from her blistered feet. Her robe was dust-covered and torn on the hem. It had trailed across wastes of sand. This patrician lady made no pause, did not even taste the water. I remembered the many times that we had halted at the wells. I wondered had she endured to pass them all as she had passed this fountain. How had she escaped discovery on the desert in full sunlight, while hundreds searched for her? Fast leaving where I rose to follow her. We soon came into a large hall of barbaric magnificence. Singular tiles and mosaic of shining and oriental brilliance lined all the open doors, portals, and arches, undraped, gave vistas of antique magnificence. Into this luxury intruded strange, crude relics of antiquity. Some of the apartments blazed with lights. One corner was shrouded in deep shade. Into its obscurity opened a hieroglyphic-marked gate, which was hung between huge orange-coloured posts, covered with mystic characters in black. When Xartella, War's daughter, reached the central hall, she dropped like an inanimate object upon the floor. I hastened to her side. She seemed in a stupor of unnatural slumber. I could not tell whether it was weariness or a mesmeric state. I brought water, and when I placed the cup at her parched lips, she did not drink. Finding I could not rouse her, I sought refuge in the shadows beyond the orange gate. Such mystery and singularity were about me that I was scarcely sure I had still retained my reason. I wondered if I really experienced what I thought I did, or if I had gone mad in that corridor. I almost was afraid to move lest I restore some horrible consciousness. It would have been better had I selected some other hiding place. No rest was here for a confused brain. A deep red hue steeped the gloom, through which slanted shafts of blue light looking like swords dipped in blood. Odd rounded bottles or huge jars were on all sides. A crimson liquid was in them, peculiar spice dust, cumbering the way with so many dark objects which yielded and cracked when I stepped upon them, that I looked about. It was the only match which I possessed. It showed me mummies, hundreds of grinning mummies, piled and shelved and scattered about the floor. Their hideous faces were everywhere. Then the match expired. After some time I accustomed myself to the darkness, and saw great cases of glass in which lay sleeping persons. Some of these were young and beautiful, some were very like mummies. The feet of each one were bathed in the crimson liquid. The entire scheme was incomprehensible to me, who groped shiveringly among the horrors, hoping to find some unravelment of the mystery, and so doing found the most monstrous iniquity of all. It seemed a living mummy. It moved its eyes and head, but did not speak. A tattered cloak, covered with ancient symbolic designs, was heavily crumpled upon the withered body. I lifted a portion of the weight from the feeble frame. So doing, I struck down into dust a crown agleam with precious jewels. I heard the sound of Xartella's voice. Some powerful influence seemed to coerce me. I moved toward him. It needed all my strength of will, all realization of my danger, to keep me in hiding while I beheld him once more. He paused beside Xartella, deep solemnity upon his face. He seemed to note her veil, her tattered dress, her blistered feet. He lifted his hand, slowly moved it, beckoning. A bevy of beautiful slave girls came. I noticed how singular was their step, their feet as they surrounded Xartella. Then War's daughter rose to her feet, opened her eyes. Amazement, horror, despair followed the first bewildered face. She clasped her white hands to her brow and seemed confounded. Xartella watched silently. After a time she turned as if to fly. Then, like a congealing, returned the somnambulistic state, and with the same clicking step as the slave she departed into another chamber. Xartella then came into the hall of mummies, where I was hidden among the jars. There was now no call upon me, and I could think and act independently. I watched as the mysterious man searched among the cases, often speaking to the darkness. He removed the jar of crimson liquid from the feet of a beautiful youth, shook him, and lifted. The sleeper opened great vacant eyes and stared sightlessly at the dark burning eyes of Xartella. Then he followed him through clouds of dust. Click, click sounded his step as he crossed the great rooms, drew aside a portiere, and dropped like a limp doll upon an inanimate collection of the same sort of humanity. Revealed to me by the lifting of the curtain were hundreds like him tossed into a pile of moveless loveliness, as were the mummies heaped in still hideousness. It occurred to my mind that these perfect men and women were resurrected mummies, restored only to physical life. Xartella was their soul. Not even by his art could a soul be hindered in its eternal progression. Astounded as I was, the more I considered on this idea, certain I grew that it must be so. I determined to try an experiment, the elvish creature with the live head. I remembered that the jar which had held the withered feet was very small. In such a multitude of mummies, discrimination was impossible. Xartella must have forgotten this one. I would restore it. I changed the small jar for one such as had restored the youth. I filled this jar to the brim with the crimson liquid. In these preparations I found again the crown which I laid carefully upon the stone shelf. I was sure those dreadful eyes followed the crown with anxious watchfulness. After all this was done, I returned for secrecy into a grove of large leaf-foliaged trees which was outside the gate. Here I regaled myself with a delicious fruit, such as I had never tasted, composed myself to rest, and fell into a deep slumber. I have always thought I must have slept for days. Chapter 3. Aflach. My first waking thought was of the dark room and my experiment. The orange gate was locked, but I climbed upon the stone partition wall and grew cold to behold some moving object. It was in shades and far, but it was where I had left that mummy which lived. I crept noiselessly around to where the wall was above and beside it. A woman was there. She had risen and twined the dust-filled tatters of the hieroglyph robe about her. Her words were maledictions. Her breath seemed made of sobs. She held, clutched in her claw-like fingers, that crown. As she peered through a little wicket in the wall, I judged she could see Artosa, for thus she spake. Thou infatuate dupe, thou foil of fiend, beware, for the glance of those eyes thy life. For Xartella's smile, thy all eternity. Willingly a sacrifice, she said, and as she prophesied, the ages of this weary old earth have produced it. She has come across hot sands at his call, into this dark haven at his bidding, crowned by his hand, throned by his side. Even while the glamour of her crown is new, this maiden lays it down. All this, and for him, consents to venture into an unknown futurity in hope to return again to him, with souls for all those restored of earth. I am Xartella's queen, not thou, Artosa, forsaken, forgotten. I am queen, and once again I will put on this crown. She rose to her feet. In the sword of blue light I saw her ghastly, impish face distort with rage. She lifted the crown with both hands. It is a crown, she cried, for the men have died, have slain those one's best love, have whitened hills with have coloured rivers red with brothers' blood. It is an awful power, my own ancient crown, forged in the fires built by primeval race. All knew a crown that shall fall down before it. I know the glorious life which the crimson fluid can bring back to me, Xartella, even in that mummy shape with some hint of grandeur, as in that blue. She lifted both her leathern arms, raising aloft the crown to place it on her head. But it was too heavy. She clasped it to her breast and bowed her bald head upon its gems. Xartella has forgotten Afla. He would send this puny, frightened woman of modern earth to bargain with angels. I should be sent, not such as she, cruel to steal my power, to let me almost perish yet not quite, to forget me while the years roll into centuries. Was it that my beauty waned? No, Xartella's red jar would have given to me supernatural loveliness. Rather was it because he deemed my crown more blessed than his. I left this thing which I had evoked from mummy life, this creature of the shades. It was no forgotten fate. It was a woman who would restore herself to a majesty which would be most terrible to Artosa. But where had the living gone? The beautiful resurrected and the baleful restored became so unendurable to me that during the prolonged absence of Xartella and Artosa, I hid myself in the recess of the fountain. There I counted the slanting beams of 14 sunsets before I heard music and the sound of Xartella's voice. Then I forgot my loneliness, for the glory of the picture presented in Artosa was enthroned beside Xartella. Rest had restored her resplendent beauty. Her hair was coiled and diademed. A gossamer robe of gold and rose was bound about with bands of gems. Her feet were cased in broidered shoes. Before the thrones whirled all the host of beautiful youths and maidens, waving salutations with their white or tawny arms, tossing their long loose hair and moving in a mechanical accord with discordant music twanged from stringed instruments struck by the hands of dark-skinned musicians. It was bewildering. Majesty, splendor, beauty centered upon the throne. Gorgeous hues burnished, motion glinted the foreground of the scene. Even the jarring music here was not unpleasant. A great sarcophagus of transparent substance stood conspicuously close by the thrones. The lid was raised. From time to time Artosa glanced toward it, almost with dread. But her white hand lay in the clasp of that one dark and strong. The touch seemed to control her. Then I heard Xartella explain in soft voice, with an oriental figurativeness of expression which transformed to a translation the real horror of the desired sacrifice. Artosa must consent to enclose herself in the mysterious casket. Death was sure in the thousandth of an instant. A resurrection, Xartella insisted, was by his art just as certain. She would be able to procure, through her intercession, souls for all his restored multitudes. When she returned, more glorious than other earth creatures, she should reign centuries, not in that dark, contracted realm beneath a pyramid already crumbling, but in such visioned land as I was certain was not builded above the seas of earth, and only had foundation in the imaginings of this half-god. And this must be a willing sacrifice. Hello, I'm sorry I didn't. I almost done with Xartella, and I'm going to move on to Xélucha, but first, listening for her answer, Xélucha paused, forgetting the lagging dancers. Like dolls, they began to in their places. You see, he said, they have no souls but mine. Artosa, will you go? I will go, replied Artosa, very sad. But how can I go willingly and leave you? You will return. I may not find the weary way. Love will lead you back. In that other sphere may be no love. Whence I am to procure all those souls, love may be dead. Love may even forget. Fond heart, there are not moments in eternity to make true love forget. It was Afla, and as she suddenly appeared before us and uttered these words, I wondered had she not changed into an angel. Her majesty and beauty paled those others as the sun pales the moon and all the stars. She might have been moulded from moonlight and robed in woven dewdrops, so marvellous was her humanity, so unreal her shimmering garments. Xartella sprang from the throne to approach her. A look of rapture transfigured his stern face. Afla, my wife. His words were interrupted. This woman of glory lifted to her bronze gold hair the same crown which I had lifted from the dust, and as she raised it, in dust fell down the antique brilliant crown which graced Xartella's haughty head. Xartella, this is my crown. For this crown man has destroyed the one best beloved, but 'tis an ancient ring of power. Behold how newer diadems shall fall before it. I had drawn Xartella's crown, crumbled into dust. It fell upon my hand. The maiden, forgotten at this supreme moment by her captor, turned to me, and the cry of a girl's terror flew from the splendid throne to my arms. I do not wish to die, she sobbed. I do not dare to bring those souls. I wish to return to my father's palace. I do not wish to cross the chill river, death. Oh, to float once more in glory of sunlight on the Nile. She fell at my feet, weeping, frightened, imploring my aid, and I comforted her with common words of earthly encouragement which seemed strangely out of place. Afla moved near the sarcophagus. Xartella, upon what shore dwells man when he... Xartella, upon what shore dwells man when he has died to higher life? Let others ask the question, Afla, not such as thou. Not yet a soul for all these dear ones? There is but one dear on earth. Let these dead rest. Go not across the boundary. I will be your ambassadress. I will seek some friendly archangel, and may return with the souls to light your empire of the dead. Xartella moved to prevent her, but he seemed chained. The thing which I had thought a fate forgotten now proved itself the more powerful of the two. Afla dropped like a cloud of silver into the fatal casket. With a heavy jar, the lid flashed down. Come back! I never meant to let you reach. There is no light left in my earth. I do not know that I can bring you back. I only waited. Oh, Afla, I never meant that you should die or really be forgotten. A fearful sight was to see the powerful Xartella striving vainly to tear away the lid from the sarcophagus, to see the glinting of the crown through the transparent sides, to note the still face in the majesty of death. Xartella crashed article after article into shatters, trying to break that seemingly fragile lid. I have called too late. I have waited my repentant words until she hears me not. Then he cast himself down beside the casket and hid his face. Around him lay the still dancers. I whispered to Artosa, egress from the pyramid. Even then the great walls began to shudder as if shaken by earthquake. Light as if of sun filled the space. We too shrank away from something vast and blinding which neared Xartella. He rose and stood appalled. A voice like the serene music of a singing ocean uttered these words. Call me not back. Hear ye the thunder gong of the stampeding throng in miracles of white in glory swept along. It is vibrant chord of that transcendent song which earth can never sing. Only a man art thou, Xartella. Thou hast no power in heaven. Another cycle I have finished in the great wheel of the worlds. I shall no more return. Never may life go back. Come thou, come meet me here. Then all was dark. Again the pyramid shuddered. Artosa clung to my arm. A great rock fell from the center of the pyramid, and as it dropped it buried Xartella and the sarcophagus. The stars of heaven shone down on us. We saw two great white spirits sail grandly into the distant blue. The speaker ceased. Is that all? I asked. My story is ended. But Artosa, she followed Afla's call and died 3 days after I had restored her to her father's house. Then the old man pressed the spear into the seam of the stones. I was not surprised to see the rock turn and reveal a pit. But in the grey dawn I saw the flash of steel. Before my eyes the stranger fell, a corpse into the black. I roused the camp. Now listen, this is the strangest of it all. We found the great stone surrounded with bleached bones and mummified forms. We found dozens of great jars with a dry red powder in them. One of the men stepped upon a white ball which burst and enveloped him in an impenetrable white light in which he was invisible for half a minute. Another found a number of great fan-like structures of glass in colors red, yellow, and blue. These, when flashed open in the sun, gave the effect of a great dazzling star. I found only this. I suppose it to be a piece of the broken sarcophagus. In all the earth I have found no other substance like it. And that's the end of that one. And now we shall go and read M.P. Shiel's Xélucha, or Xélucha, I really don't actually know. I'm just going to try and find an illustration that might actually be useful for it. No, it's not Xélucha. I suppose, that's not a great looking cover. I'm trying to find, I'm not sure I can, yes, but there's a nipple in this image, and I'm not sure if I will not be smited from on high. Okay. I'm trying to find, I might as well, I'm trying to see if I can find a slightly bigger version of this cover, but okay, fair enough, I suppose. Let me just try and see. Okay, how much might be reducing the size of it? So, okay. Now then, we can remove this, and now we'll be reading Xélucha by M.P. Shiel. Published in 1896 in Shapes in the Fire. So, he goeth after her and knoweth not. From a diary. 3 days ago, by heaven it seems an age, but I am shaken, my reason is debauched. A while since I fell into a momentary coma precisely resembling an attack of petit mal. Tombs and worms and epitaphs, that is my dream. At my age, with my physique, to walk staggery like a man stricken. But all this will pass. I must collect myself. My reason is debauched. 3 days ago, it seems an age. I sat on the floor before an old sister full of letters. I lighted upon a packet of Cosmos. Why, I had forgotten them. They are turning sere. Truly, I can no more call myself a young man. I sat reading listlessly, rapt back by memory. To muse is to be lost. Of that evil habit I must wring the neck, or look to perish. Once more I threaded the mazy sphere harmony of the minuet, reeled in the waltz, long pomps of candelabra, the noonday of the bacchanal about me. Cosmo was the very Tsar Maharaja of the Sybarites, the Priap of the Detrax. In every unexpected alcove of the Roman villa was a couch, raised high, with necessary footstool, flanked and canopied with mirrors of clarified gold, consumption fastened upon him, reclining at last at table he could till warmed, scarce lift the wine. His eyes were like two fat glowworms coiled together. They seemed hallowed with vaporous emanations of phosphorus. Desperate, one could see, was the secret struggle with the devourer. But to the end, the princely smile persisted, calm. To the end, to the last day, he continued among that comic crew unchallenged, corrigus of all the rites, I will not say of Paphos, but of Chemos and Baal Peor. Warmed, he did not refuse the revel, the dance, the darkened chamber. It was utterly black, rayless, approached by secret passage, in shape circular, the air hot, haunted always by odours of bombs, delium, hints of dulcimer and flute, and radiated round with 100 thick-strewn ottomans of Morocco. Here Lucy Hill stabbed the heart Cacofoco, mistaking the scar on his back for the scar of Soriac. In a bath of malachite, the Princess Egla, waking late one morning, found Cosmo lying stiffly dead, the water covering him wholly. But in God's name, Mérimée, so he wrote, to think of Xélucha dead. Xélucha! Can a moonbeam then perish of suppurations? Can a rainbow be eaten by worms? Laugh with me, my friend. El Derangera, l'enfer. She will introduce the tarantula, the Tophet, Xélucha, the feminine Xélucha, recalling the splendid harlots of history. Weep with me, Manatrara, Mes Lacrima Persiana. Expert as Sargelia, cultured as Aspatia, purple as Semiramis, she comprehended the human tabernacle, my friend, its secret springs and tempers, more intimately than any savant of Salamanca who breathes. Tarare, but Xélucha is not dead. Vitality is not mortal. You cannot wrap flame in a shroud. Xélucha, where then is she? Translated, perhaps, wrapped to constellation like the daughter of Leda. She journeyed to Hindostan, accompanied by the train and the perturances of a begum, threatening descent upon the emperor of Tartary. I spoke of the desolation in the west. She kissed me and promised return. Mentioned you too, Mérimée, her conqueror, Mérimée, destroyer of woman. A breath from the conservatory rioted among the ambery whiffs of her forelocks, sending it singly a wave. Oh, that too-light tint, you know. Costumed cap a pie she had, my friend, the dainty little completeness of a daisy mirrored bright in the eyes of the browsing ox. A simile of Milton had for years, she said, inflamed the lust of her eye. The barren plains of Sericana, where Chineses drive with sails and wind their caney wagons light. Aye, and the Sabaeans, she assured me, wrongly considered flame the whole of being, the other half of things being Aristotle's quintessential light. In the Orani Hierarchica and the Faust book you meet a completeness, burning seraph, cherub full of eyes. Xélucha combined them. She would reconquer the Orient for Dionysus and return. I heard of a blazing at Delhi, drawn in a chariot by lions. Then this rumour, probably false. Indeed, it comes from a source somewhat turgid. Like Odin, Arthur, and the rest, Xélucha will reappear. Soon, subsequently, Cosmo lay down in his ballroom of malachite and slept, having drawn over him the water as a coverlet. I, and in England, heard little of Xélucha. First that she was alive, then dead, then alighted at old Tadmor in the wilderness, Palmyra now. Nor did I greatly care, Xélucha having long since turned to apples of Sodom in my mouth. Till I sat by the sister of letters and reread Cosmo, she had for some years passed from my active memories. The habit is now confirmed in me of spending the greater part of the day in sleep, while by night I wander far and wide through the city under the sedative influence of a tincture which has become necessary to my life. Such an existence of shadow is not without charm, nor, I think, could many minds be steadily subject to its conditions without elevation. Deepened awe, to travel alone with the primordial cannot but be solemn. The moon is of the hue of the glowworm, the night of the sepulchre. Nux bore not less Thanatos than Hupos, and the bitter tears of Isis redundulate to a flood. At 3, if a cab rolls by, the sound has the augustness of thunder. Once at 2, near a corner, I came upon a priest, seated dead, leering, his legs bent, one arm supported on a knee, pointed with rigid accusing forefinger blindly upward. By exact observation I found that he indicated, better guess, the star at which shoulders the wet sword of Orion. He was hideously swollen, having perished at dropsy. Thus in all supreme, is a grotesquerie, and one of the sons of night is Buffo. In a London square deserted, I should imagine even in the day I was aware of the metallic, silverly clinking approach of little shoes. It was free in heavy morning winter, a day after my rediscovery of Cosmo. I had stood by the railing, regarding the clouds sail as under the sea-legged pilotage of a moon wrapped in cloaks of inclemency. Turning, I saw a little lady, very gloriously dressed. She had walked straight to me. Her head was bare, and crisp with the amber stream which rolled lax to a globe, kneaded thick with jewels at her nape. In the redundance of her décolleté development, she resembled Parvati, mound-hip love goddess of the luscious fancy of the Brahmin. She addressed to me the question, "What are you doing there, darling?" Her loveliness stirred me. "A night is bon camarade," I replied, "sunning myself by means of the moon." "Oh, that is borrowed lustre," she returned. "You have got it from old Drummond's Flowers of Siam." Looking back, I cannot remember that this reply astonished me, though it should, of course, have done so. I said, "On my soul, no, but you? You might guess whence I come. You are dazzling, you come from Paz. Oh, farther than that, my son. Say a subscription ball in Soho. Yes, and alone in the cold, on foot. Why, I'm old, I'm a philosopher. I can pick you out riding Andromeda yonder from the ridden ram. They are in error, monsieur, who suppose an atmosphere on the broad side of the moon. I have reason to believe that on Mars dwells a race whose lids are transparent like glass, so that the eyes are visible during sleep, and every varying dream moves imaged forth to the beholder in tiny panorama on the limpid iris. You cannot imagine me a mere fill. To be escorted is to admit yourself a woman, and that is improper in nowhere. Young Else drives an equipage at court, but Artemis walks alone. Get out of my borrowed light in the name of Diogenes. I am going home. Near Piccadilly. But a cab? No cabs for me, thank you. The distance is a mere nothing. Come. We walked forward, my companion at once put an interval between us, quoting from the Spanish curate that the open is an enemy of love. The Talmudist, she twice insisted, rightly held the hand, the sacred part of the person. And at that point also contact was for the moment interdict. Her walk was extremely rapid. I followed. Not a cat was anywhere visible. We reached at length the door of a mansion in St. James's. There was no light. It seemed tenantless. The windows, all uncurtained, pasted across, some of them with the words "To Let." My companion, however, fitted up the steps and beckoning passed inward. I followed, slammed the door, and was in the darkness. I heard her ascend, and presently a region of glimmer above revealed a stairway of marble curving broadly up. On the floor where I stood was no carpet, nor furniture. The dust was very thick. I had begun to mount them. To my surprise, she stood by my side, returned, and whispered, "To the very top, darling." She roared nimbly up, anticipating me. Higher I could no longer doubt that the house was empty but for us. All was a vacuum full of dust and echoes. But at the top, light streamed from a door, and as I entered a good-sized oval saloon at about the centre of the house, I was completely dazzled by the sudden resplendence of the apartment. In the midst was a spread table, square, opulent, with gold plate, fruit dishes, 3 ponderous chandeliers of electric light above us, and I noticed what was very bizarre, one light candlestick of common tin, containing an old soiled curve of tallow on the table. The impression of the whole chamber was one of gorgeousness, not less than Assyrian. An ivory couch at the far end was made sun-like by a headpiece of chalcedony forming a sea for the sport of emerald ictiotori. Copper hangings, panelled with mirrors in eye-aspirated crystal, corresponded with a dome of flame and copper, yet this latter, I now remember, produced upon my glance an impression of actual grime. My companion reclined on a small Sigma couch, raised high to the table level in a Semitic manner, visible to her saffron slippers of satin. She pointed me to a seat opposite. The incongruity of this presence in the middle of this arrogance of pomp so tickled me that no power could have kept me from a smile. It was a grimy chair, mean, all wood, nor was I long in discovering one leg somewhat shorter than its fellows. She indicated wine in a black glass bottle, but herself made no pretense of drinking or eating. She lay on hip and elbow, petite, resplendent, and looked gravely upward. I, however, drank. You are tired, I said. One sees that. It is precious little that you see, she returned, dreamy, hardly glancing. How your mood has changed then. You are morose. You never, I think, saw a Norse passage grave? And abrupt? Never? A passage grave? No. It is worth a journey. They are circular, oblong chambers of stone covered by great earth mounds, with a passage of slabs connecting them with the outer air. All round the chamber the dead sit with the head resting upon bent knees and consult together in silence. Drink wine with me and be less Tartarian. You certainly seem to be a fool, she replied, with perfect sardonic iciness. Is it not then highly romantic? They belong, you know, to the Neolithic age. As the teeth fall one by one from the lipless mouths, they are caught by the lap. When the lap thins, they roll to the floor of stone. Thereafter, every tooth that drops all round the chamber sharply breaks the silence. Yes, it is like a century slow, circularly successive drippings of slime in some cavern of the far subterranean. Swine seems heady. They express themselves in dialect largely dental. The ape, on the other hand, is a language wholly guttural. A town clock tolled 4. Our talk was holed with silences and heavy paced. The wine's yeasty exhalation reached my brain. I saw her through a mist, dilating, large, uncertain, shrieking again to dainty compactness. But amorousness had died within me. Do you know, she asked, what has been discovered in one of the Danish... Oh, Lord. Apologies for this. I have no idea how to pronounce this. I'm just going to give it a stab. In one of the Danish keukenweddings by a little boy, it was ghastly. The skeleton of a huge fish with human, you are most unhappy. Be silent. You are full of care. I think you a great fool. You are racked with misery. You are a child. You have not even an instinct of the meaning of the word. How? Am I not a man? I too miserable, careful. You are not really anything until you can create. Create what? Matter. That is foppish. Matter cannot be created nor destroyed. Truly then, you must be a creature of unusually weak intellect. I see that now. Matter does not exist then. There is no such thing, really. It is an appearance, a spectrum. Every writer, not imbecile, from Plato to Fichte, has voluntarily or involuntarily proven that we're good. To create it is to produce an impression of its reality upon the senses of others. To destroy it is to wipe a wet rag across a scribbled slate. Perhaps I do not care, since no one can do it. No one? You are a mere embryo. Who then? Anyone whose power of will is equivalent to the gravitating force of a star of the first magnitude. By heaven, you choose to be facetious. Are then wills of such equivalence? There have been 3, the founders of religions. There was a 4th, a cobbler of Herculaneum, whose mere volition induced the cataclysm of Vesuvius in 79, in direct opposition to the gravity of Sirius. There are more fames than you have ever sung, you know. A greater number of disembodied spirits, too, I feel certain. By heaven, I cannot but think you are full of sorrow. Poor wight, come drink with me. The wine is thick and boon.
Is it not Setian? It makes you sway and swell before me. I swear like a purple cloud of evening. But you are mere clayey ponderance. I did not know that. You are no companion. Your little interest revolves round the lowest centres. Come, forget your agonies. What think you is the portion of the buried body first sought by the worm? The eyes, the eyes. You are hideously wrong. You are so utterly at sea. My God! She had bent forward with such rage of contradiction as to approach me closely. A loose gown of amber silk, white-sleeved, had replaced her ball attire, though at what opportunity I could not guess. Wondering, I noticed it as she now placed her palms far down upon the table. A sudden rapture as of spice and orange flowers mingled with the abhorrent faint odour of mortality, over-ready for the tomb, greeted my sense. A chill crept upon my flesh. You are so hopelessly at fault. For God's sake, you are so miserably deluded. Not the eyes at all. Then in heaven's name, what? 5 tolled from a clock. The uvula, the soft drop of mucous flesh, suspended from the palate above the glottis. They eat through the face cloth and cheek, or crawl by the lips through a broken tooth filling the mouth. They make straight for it. It is the delicate of the vault. At her horror of interest I grew sick, at her odour, at her words. Some unspeakable sense of insignificance, of debility, held me dumb. You say I am full of sorrows, you say I am racked with woe, that I gnash with anguish. Well, you are a mere child in intellect. You use words without realization of meaning, like those minds in what Leibniz calls symbolical consciousness. But suppose it were so. It is so. You know nothing. I see you twist and grind. Your eyes are very pale. I thought they were hazel. They are the faint blueness of phosphorus shimmering in the darkness. That proves nothing. But the white of the sclerotic is dyed to yellow, and you look inward. Why do you look so palely inward, so woe-worn upon your soul? Why can you speak of nothing but the sepulchre and its rottenness? Your eyes seem to me warm with centuries of vigil, with mysteries of millenniums of pain. Pain, but you know so little of it. You are wind and words, of its philosophy and rationale. Nothing. Who knows? I will give you a hint. It is the subconscious and conscious creatures of eternity and of eternal loss. The least prick of a pin, not paean, and Esculapius, and the powers of heaven and hell can utterly heal. Of an everlasting loss of pristine wholeness, the conscious body is subconscious, and pain is its side, the tragedy. So with all pain, the greater the loss. The hugest of losses is, of course, the loss of time. If you lose that, any of it, you plunged at once into transcendentalism, the infinitudes of loss if you lose all of it. But you so wildly exaggerate. You rant, I tell you, of commonplace with the woe. Hell is where a clear, untrammeled spirit is subconscious of lost time, where it boils and writhes with envy of the living world, hating it forever and all the aeon on all the suns of life. But curb yourself, drink, I implore you, I implore for God's sake but once, to hasten to the snare that is woe, to drive your ship upon the lighthouse rock that is Mara, to wake and feel it irrevocably true that you went after her, and the dead were there, and her guests were in the depths of hell, and you did not know it, though you might have. Look out upon the houses of the city this dawning day. Not one, I tell you, but in it haunts some soul, walking up and down the old theatre of its little day, goading imagination by 1,000 childish tricks, resemblances, elaborately duping itself into the momentary fantasy that it still lives, that the chance of life is not forever and forever lost, yet riving all the time with under memories of the wasted summer, the lapsed brief light between the two eternal glooms. Riving, I say, and shriek to you, riving, Mary Mare, you destroying fiend. She had sprung tall now. She seemed to me between couch and table. Mérimée, I screamed, my name, harlot, in your maniac mouth. By God, woman, you terrify me to death. I too sprang, the hairs of my head catching stiff horrors from my fancies. Your name? Can you imagine me ignorant of your name or anything concerning you, Mérimée? Why did you not sit yesterday and read of me in a letter of Cosmo's? Ah! Hysteria bursting high in sob and laughter from my arid lips. Ah! Xélucha! My memory grows palsied and grey. Xélucha, pity me! My walk is in the very valley of shadow. Senile and sere. Observe my hair, Xélucha. Its grizzled growth, trepidant, Xélucha, clouded. I am not the man you knew, Xélucha, in the palaces of Cosmo. You are Xélucha. You rave, poor worm, she cried, her face contorted by species of malicious contempt. Xélucha died of cholera 10 years ago at Antioch. I wiped the froth from her lips. Her nose underwent a green decay before burial. So far sunken into the brain was the left eye. You are Xélucha, I shrieked. Voices now thunder howl it within my consciousness. And by the holy God, Xélucha, though you blight me with the breath of the hell you are, I shall clasp you, living or damned. I rushed towards her. The word madman hissed as by tongues of 10,000 serpents through the chamber I heard. A bench of pestilent corruption puffed poisonous upon the putrid air. For a moment to my wildered eyes there seemed to rear itself swelling high to the roof a formless tower of ragged cloud, and before my projected arms that closed upon the very emptiness of insanity, I was tossed by the operation of some behemoth potency, far circling backwards to the utmost circumference of the oval, where my head colliding I fell, shocked into insensibility. When the sun was low toward night, I lay awake and listlessly observed the grimy roof and the sordid chair, and the candlestick of tin and the bottle of which I had drunk. The table was small, filthy, of common deal, uncovered. All wore the appearance of having stood there for years. But for them the room was void, the vision of luxury thin to air. Sudden memory flashed upon me. I scrambled to my feet and plunged and tottered, bawling through the twilight into the street. So that was Xélucha, and I believe I'm just going to check something now. I have something else planned as well after those two, at least one. A story that I actually mentioned we were going to read. What I'm going to do now, though, is I'm going to check how long it is to make sure that actually it wouldn't be too much of an issue if it were to actually not be that great. I don't know what that is. Okay, sorry, I'm sorry for that jump scare. I was looking for something. Now then, let's go to the contents page very quickly. There we go. So the third one, 20-something pages. Okay, but I believe, yes, we can possibly do that. The writing isn't that big. I can close this because I don't need that anymore. And this is still being shown. I don't need this. I can close that out, as well as this. Where is it? Ah, there we go. So let's go here. So this is another story from the collection Who Shall Condemn by I believe it is John C. Shannon. I'm just going to very quickly find where I just had it. There it is. I'll just put it closer. So it is called The Revenge of Nikolai Petronovich, sorry. Yes, I believe, yes, John C. Shannon. Yes, sure. So let's start. There was music and dancing at Lethbridge Towers. Years had gone by since the towers had been the scene of such gaiety and so much life. In fact, since the death of old Lord Lethbridge, the splendid old English mansion had been left a prey to the moth and rust. The old gentleman had always lived abroad, his health demanding a warm climate, and as a general rule, he had only returned to England to spend a month or so of the hottest of our English weather at his fine and beautifully situated country seat. However, the dear old gentleman had now been dead for some 2 years, regretted and beloved by all his servants, for the simple reason that he was a kind-hearted old man who, despite his high position in England's aristocracy, had yet retained his natural genial manner, even amidst the stiffness and cant of English high society. His servants, and indeed all those with whom he came in contact, whose positions in life were less lofty than his own, loved and respected him simply because he had always treated them with a thoughtful consideration seldom found in men of his position. Since the old lord's death, his butler and housekeeper, who had grown old in his service, had been the sole occupants of the towers, being left there together with 2 or 3 domestics to look after the handsome old place. Lord Lethbridge had died abroad, and ever since that event, as we have already mentioned, his beautiful mansion had been practically shut up, his only son Leonard, the present Lord Lethbridge, never having paid it a visit since his father's death, perhaps because, as he had deeply loved and honoured his father, he could not bear to again look upon the home of his boyhood, around which so many sad memories clustered. Sorry, I am just trying to find a thing so I can sense. Someone just asked me about the stream, so sorry. Okay. Let me just. Sorry, I just had to send a link, and now I got distracted again. Well, because I'm trying to find. There we go. Lady Lethbridge, his mother, had died whilst he was yet an infant. Consequently, he had to fall back upon his father in all his little trials and difficulties, and the old gentleman had become all the dearer to his handsome son because he had been called upon to fill the position of both father and mother. As far as the butler and housekeeper were aware, young Lord Lethbridge was at present travelling about somewhere in the world, but they being far removed from the general sources of information upon that point, namely the society, had not the slightest inkling as to his whereabouts, but perchance at that young gentleman's numerous clubs, or sought your information from the aforementioned society papers, or from his wide circle of friends and acquaintances, you would have learned that he was at present abiding in London, where he was busy making active preparations for his marriage with a young and beautiful lady, whose name, as the beauty of the London season, was upon everybody's lips. Therefore, one can quite understand the astonishment with which James, the worthy butler of the Towers, who remembered Master Leo from his earliest days, one fine morning, received an intimation from London to the effect that the Towers was to be thoroughly repapered, redecorated, and refurnished, as his young lord and master intended shortly to return thither, bringing with him as his bride a young and charming lady. The old man, in his astonishment, had let the letter fall to the ground, but had, with much muttering and many exclamations of surprise, at last regained sufficient composure to pick it up again and trot off with it to Mrs. Maddox, the equally old housekeeper. Needless to relate, it was not long before the neighbourhood, which was almost entirely peopled with country folk, was in possession of the great news, and in process of time the rumours spread far and wide, and at last became the talk of the countryside, conjecture being rife as to the looks and etc. of the new mistress of Lethbridge Towers. Meanwhile, the Towers was given over to an army of painters, paperers, decorators, and various gentlemen who, dressed in seedy-looking frock coats, equally seedy tall hats, speaking a language all their own, came down from London and took possession of the old mansion, marching through its rooms, pencil behind ear and notebook in hand, taking notes of the many and varied articles which would be required here and there and everywhere in order to adequately fit up the place for the reception of Lord Lethbridge and his beautiful young wife. For rumour had already decreed that the wife of Lord Lethbridge could not be otherwise than extremely beautiful, as the ladies of the house of Lethbridge had always been from time immemorial famous for their great beauty. An army of gardeners took possession of the much-neglected garden, and in a very short space of time converted it from a waste of howling wilderness into a scene of extreme neatness and perfect order. The walks were swept, the lawns mowed and rolled, till they presented the appearance and smoothness of velvet. The rarest flowers were brought down from London, regardless of expense, and planted in wonderful patterns in the beautifully laid-out gardens. And as it was now the middle of summer, and a hot one at that, it can easily be understood that the grounds of Lethbridge Towers, which in the old lord's time had been a show-place, once more became a scene of loveliness which rapidly became the talk of the neighbourhood. The fine old trees which lined the long avenue were in full leaf, and costly flowers blossomed in rare harmony of colour in the beds. The grey walls of the old mansion contrasted softly with the dark green tints of the ivy that covered them, and here and there a mass of beautiful roses, rare in hue and large in size, relieved in their brightness the sameness of the prevailing green and grey around them, sending out into the warm summer air a delicious perfume almost overpowering in its delicate sweetness, and the walks and shady avenues looked the picture of neatness and order. The painters, paperers, decorators, and the gentlemen of the notebooks and pencils had been gone more than a week. James had blossomed forth in a brand-new suit, resplendent with gilt buttons. Mrs. Maddox came forth in rustling black silk, with a new lace collar and cuffs. Horses, carriages, grooms, and footmen arrived from London, together with a whole army of servants dully engaged by the thoughtful old housekeeper. The furnishing of the mansion was complete and magnificent. To use James the butler's words, it was very handsome, or handsomer indeed than when my dear old master were alive. Every window in the towers stood wide open to let in the beautiful June sunlight. The birds awoke the echoes of the long avenue, and altogether the place presented a picture of life and animation such as it had not displayed for the last 3 years at least. James and Mrs. Maddox were in the qui-vive of excitement as the time for the arrival of Lord Lethbridge and his bride drew near. Over and over again they each made totally unnecessary excursions into every room in the house, in their anxiety to ensure everything being in apple-pie order for the reception of their long-absent lord and his newly-wed lady, whom, as may be imagined, they were both most anxious to see. Up and down the oaken-polished stairs hurried the good old housekeeper, her silks rustling as they had not rustled for years. In and out of the beautifully furnished rooms, resplendent with costly ornaments, pictures, and bric-a-brac, which the gentlemen of the notebooks and pencils had provided, money being no object, as James had ejaculated, holding up his hands in horror as case after case had arrived from London, till at last, utterly worn out, she had made for her own comfortable room, and dropping into a well-worn armchair, had exclaimed with a sigh of relief, "Well, I do declare I am nearly dead with so much running about," after which she ordered a refreshing cup of tea wherewith to solace her shattered nerves. James, the butler, went restlessly to and fro in the lower part of the house, hurrying from the dining room to the butler's pantry, and from the butler's pantry to the cellar, arranging and rearranging everything in his anxiety to prove his devotion to his long-looked-for master. And lastly, the head groom accompanied himself by having the horses groomed and re-groomed, their coats shown like looking-glasses, and also by making his attendants stable-boys clean and polish everything till the whole place seemed almost too neat. All having done that could be done, late in the afternoon a telegram came saying that Lord and Lady Lethbridge would arrive in time for dinner. At about 5:30, the carriage, which had gone to the station to meet them, drove up to the door, which stood wide open, allowing the afternoon sunlight to stream full into the grand old hall, and at which every servant was present to welcome his or her newly returned master and mistress. No other demonstration of any kind took place, for the majority of people were not aware that the master of Lethbridge Towers was expected so soon. Stepping from the carriage, Lord Lethbridge, a tall and exceedingly handsome man in the prime of life, turned to assist his wife to do the same, and then, hat in hand, followed her up the broad steps to the terrace, which ran the full length of the front of the house, and amid the hearty good wishes and salutations of the assembled servants, passed along the hall and up the broad stairs to his rooms, reappearing in a very short space of time accompanied by his wife, an extremely beautiful woman, and after making a tour of inspection to see how matters had been carried out in his absence, he expressed himself entirely satisfied with the arrangements, which opinion his wife enthusiastically seconded, thereby causing James and Mrs. Maddox to walk with prouder step and more important mien from that time forth. Sorry, I'm seeing another message. And I'm getting rid of that. And okay, sorry, checking the chat. There we go. Then they partook of a sumptuous dinner served with magnificent pomp by James, who resplendent in evening dress, waited upon them with that perfect knowledge which only old retainers like himself possess, after which they enjoyed a short stroll in the beautiful grounds of the Towers, then retired for the night. A week elapsed, and the Towers was filled to overflowing with a brilliant house party, culled from the most illustrious names in all England. Dancing, fetes, garden parties, tennis parties, and all the many and varied gaieties indulged in by men and women of the present day were in full swing, and tonight a magnificent ball was to be given in honour of the return of Lord Lethbridge and his wife to their charming home. Yes, sorry, I was making sure that I didn't skip anything. The rooms were ablaze with light. Laughter and merriment resounded everywhere, and the ball went smoothly on its course. Outside, the moon shed her light over a lovely scene, outlining against the dark azure of the summer sky the deep green foliage of the fine old oaks which form the magnificent avenue of this grand and ancient English mansion. Without the drawing-room window, which opened onto the broad flagged terrace surrounded by a low balustrade of massive stone, stood Lady Lethbridge, her hand resting lightly on the parapet, gazing with a faraway look in her eyes upon the beautiful scene which lay in peaceful silence before her, lit up by the silver moon. Upon the other side of the parapet, and growing close up to it, was a thick bank of laurels, so thick indeed, and so clothed in foliage that they would have afforded cover for almost anything. Beyond these laurels lay a broad flower-bed, in which bloomed a profusion of rare flowers, and beyond that again was the wide gravel drive, every stone of which stood out in minutest detail in the searching light of the full moon. The scene was one of indescribable loveliness. Behind her, the old house, covered with ivy and flowering creepers. Before her, the long dark avenue, bordered by oaks centuries old, whose trunks stood out like black sentinels in the still calm night, their dark foliage outlined against the sky. There lay the lawns, looking like softest velvet bathed in a flood of moonlight, and here and there a fountain threw up its silvery spray, which sparkled as it rose and fell like a myriad diamonds as the moonlight caught its drops, and the scent of a million flowers came to her, borne on the cool night air, which would have been absolutely still but for the sound of the lovely music of a dreamy waltz, the sound of many feet moving over a polished floor, and the subdued laughter and chatter of the dancers which came faintly to her ears out from the brilliantly lighted rooms immediately behind her. Lady Lethbridge stood and gazed upon this scene, a sense of triumph filling her soul, for was she not the mistress of all this loveliness, and the wife of one of England's proudest peers? And in that thought the height of this fair woman's ambition was realized. Xenia, Countess Xenia, Countess Slevskolov, stood, her hand resting upon the parapet, her beautiful face turned up to the moon's bright rays. And as she stood, she thought, and her thoughts travelled back over a period of 4 years. No longer was she standing upon the terrace of one of England's ancestral homes, but in the brightly lighted ball of the Russian court, the admired of all admirers was she, for at that time the Countess Slevskolov was the beauty of St. Petersburg's proud court, looked upon with favour by the Tsar and courted by the great ones of the state. But despite all this, the Countess yet moved in that brilliant throng, unheeding the homage paid her, thinking only of a handsome, earnest, pale-faced young man whom she had but that afternoon been talking to. By nature fickle as most extremely beautiful women are, and although at that time very young, the Countess Xenia had nevertheless already had many suitors, amongst whom might be found many of the most illustrious names in all Russia. But at the present moment her capricious heart had set itself upon this man, a young painter who was just at that time forcing his name before the great Russian public by means of his wonderfully powerful pictures, which depicted with irresistible force the wrongs inflicted upon the Russian nation by her despotic governors. The Countess Xenia had made his acquaintance quite casually at the house of a mutual friend, to which he had been invited, like herself, to dinner, and to him had fallen the honour of taking the most beautiful woman in St. Petersburg down to that usually most boring of functions. And needless to relate, her wondrous beauty had filled his artist's heart with passionate love. A brilliant conversationalist when he chose, he had on this occasion exerted himself to his utmost. And when the evening had passed, which it did all too quickly, he had left the image of his pale, though strikingly handsome countenance indelibly impressed upon the Countess's memory. She felt strangely interested in the young painter, who was moreover a member of one of the oldest and proudest families in St. Petersburg, not only because of his looks, though they exerted a powerful influence upon her, but because he was engaged in the patriotic though dangerous work of putting before the world his country's wrongs. To do this in Russia, as most of us know, requires more than ordinary courage, for the simple reason that a mere word, spoken, often means the sudden disappearance of that daring individual who is never heard of again. In the Countess's heart, this man inspired an admiration which bordered upon love, and a few more interviews which she had with him, meeting him at various times in the houses of her aristocratic friends, rapidly ripened this feeling into one of passionate devotion. And the climax was reached when, after sitting to him for her portrait, which, by the way, created a sensation when finished, he had asked her in manly, earnest language to be his wife. She had consented, and for some weeks the time had passed as in a dream. Then came a rude awakening. Her father had been appointed Russian ambassador in England, and she, after a touching farewell to her artist lover, in which they had both vowed eternal fidelity, had accompanied him thither, and in London had created the same sensation as she had done in the court of St. Petersburg, being both the heiress and the beauty of the season. Gradually, the thought of her erstwhile lover faded from her mind, till at last she forgot him almost entirely, or the memory of him only lingered in her heart, as does the memory of a sweet dream, so that when Lord Lethbridge, who was introduced to her by one of her numerous friends, after a brief acquaintance asked her to marry him, she had, in view of his being a member of one of England's oldest families, and an immensely wealthy man, and moreover, because she chose to fancy she loved him, been duly installed, as has already been related, mistress of grand old Lethbridge Towers. Thus was the ambition of this proud, shallow, fickle woman ultimately attained. Tonight, however, by this freak of nature, mayhap the beauty and stillness of the night recalled it to her the memory of her lover, whose name, by the way, was Nikolai Petronovitch, came with renewed force into her mind. She remembered him as she had last seen him, tall, dark, pale, and handsome. She felt again his passionate kisses as he had sworn after she returned from England he would make her his wife. She heard her own voice brokenly whispering similar vows into his ears. She felt once more the depression and lack of spirits which had followed her separation from him. What was he doing now, she wondered vaguely. Had he heard of her marriage, or had he not? And if so, what would he think of her? Would he, in his hot-headed Russian nature, register a vow of vengeance upon the man she had married? Or would he wreak that vengeance upon herself? And a vague, uneasy sensation took possession of her mind at the thought. A slight sound broke upon the air, a very slight rustling noise which made her start, but which instantly ceased, and she took no further notice of it. In the far-off distance an owl commenced to hoot, a weird, unearthly sound which made her shiver. She turned hurriedly, meaning to re-enter the drawing-room, when a form sprang lightly and silently over the stone balustrade of the terrace. It was Nikolai Petrovitch. By a single movement he seized her hand and whispered in a voice of concentrated passion, a word, a cry, and you die, Xenia. The grip on her arm hurt her, and he whispered in trembling tones, you are hurting me, Nikolai. His name seemed to come quite naturally from her lips. Very slightly he relaxed his hold upon her, and burning words of approach and passion poured themselves in torrent upon her ears. Rapidly he told her with what despair he had heard of her marriage, how he had been as one demented for days following, how he had sworn to take the life of the man who had stolen her from him, how he had been hunted from Russia as a nihilist, and was even now being sought for by the Russian spies, how he had for months past lived in constant fear of his life, hoping only, living for the moment when he should stand once more face to face with her. All this poured in a very torrent of words from his lips. His face was haggard, his eyes burned with an unnatural fire, and for the moment he looked more like a madman than anything else, as he stood there in the moonlight, his breath coming in great gasps from between his lips. Xenia recoiled a step from him in terror, and a low, cynical laugh escaped him. You have forgotten me, he cried. You hate me now, though you loved me once. Well, so be it, he went on with forced calmness. Women are ever fickle. How could I expect to cope with a man of your husband's standing? You are always mercenary, Xenia. You only played with me, but you shall regret your play. Your husband's, the word was hastily spoken, hours are numbered. Tonight you will be a widow. He stepped as though exhausted by his passion. No, she cried, wildly catching his arm. Nikolai, I wronged you, I admit, but spare him, do not kill him. I love him. The words were spoken softly, and she bowed her head before him. Spare him, ejaculated the man, and you love him. Then he dies. No, she cried again. Spare him for my sake, Nikolai. You loved me once, remember it now. She stooped, appalled by the look that came into his face. Yes, he muttered hurriedly, glancing quickly about him. Yes, I loved you once. Hear no fear, he shall not die. My God, how I loved you, Xenia. And now, goodbye. Before she had time to stop him, he crushed her in his arms and kissed her passionately. Not backwards, he leapt silently over the parapet and disappeared swiftly down the avenue, leaving the Countess standing trembling and frightened upon the terrace. She turned to re-enter the drawing-room when the curtains were suddenly parted and her husband stood before her. The time you have been away, dear, he said, laughing lightly and evidently in excellent spirits. I have been looking for you everywhere, and here I find you gazing upon your newly acquired possessions. Do they satisfy you, dear? Putting his arm around her waist and kissing her. She shuddered at his kiss, for had not her former lover but this moment done the same, and yet how different were the two caresses. You are cold, he said anxiously. You should not have stayed out here for so long, and without a wrap too. Come in, darling, or you will be ill, and then he half-turned, expecting her to follow. Not yet, Leo, dear, she whispered, and how unlike her voice it sounded, for the coming of Nikolai had shaken her greatly. I have a slight headache, and the night air cools my head. The rooms are hot, and I do not feel inclined to dance. Stay with me a minute, Leo. Somehow I feel very uneasy tonight. I don't know why. The lie came glibly enough, and she laughed a little hysterical laugh as she told it. Very well, dear, responded Lord Lethbridge, and leaning his arm lightly upon the stone parapet, he gazed out over the garden. What a lovely night, he exclaimed suddenly. You might go a long way and not meet with such another scene as this. Yes, yes, she replied absent-mindedly, though her husband did not notice it. He turned as the strains of another waltz came through the half-opened window, and as he did so plucked a rose from its stem, which clung tenaciously to the side of the house, and idly smelling it, turned and held it out to his beautiful wife, saying as he did so, "A kiss for a rose, my dear, very robbery." She took the rose and kissed him, and it was the last kiss Xenia, formerly Countess Slevskolov, now Lady of Lethbridge Towers, was fated to give. Idly she took it and advancing once more to the parapet, leaned the hand which held the rose upon its broad stone surface and looked out for the last time over the garden. Afar off the owl again hooted, and she started violently at the weird, unearthly noise. Her husband noticed it and vaguely wondered what was upsetting her. Coming to her side, he put his arm around her waist and talked to her, soothing her with caressing words. A sudden burst of laughter came from the brilliantly lighted room, and he turned his head to listen. As he did so, a hand, long and thin, emerged from the depths of the laurels on the opposite side of the balustrade. The Countess had also turned her head to look after her husband, but did not remove her hand from the stone parapet. In the hand which thus appeared was a small glass vial whose contents, with lightning speed, were emptied over the rose which Lady Lethbridge still held. Then it vanished as silently and as swiftly. Once more the owl hooted. The Countess uttered a little cry, whereat her husband laughed. "It is only an owl, darling," he said. "You are not in our English country yet." "Not quite," she said, had a peculiarly pathetic tone in it. "Let us go in, dear," he replied. "Dancing will soon banish such thoughts as these from your mind." She turned to go with him, and the rose caught her eye. She raised it to her face and smelt it, smiling up into her husband's as she did so. How wonderfully sweet it! The sentence was never finished. With a gasping cry, she threw up her arms and fell backwards dead. Truly was the revenge of Nikolai Petronovitch, in its tragic suddenness, awful and complete. So there's that one, which I know that we've only been doing this for an hour and a half, and really only an hour and a half of actual reading. Getting a bit lightheaded at this moment. So I wanted this to be a shorter stream. So I'm not really sure if I'm going to make a stream or a video tomorrow. I still have to decide. But yes, I'll definitely think about what to do. As noted in the description, if for both people watching right now and who will be watching the VOD later, we would really appreciate it overall, me specifically, if you could possibly go to the PayPal link we have and donate a little. Anything would be appreciated right now. For the next few days, we're currently completely out of funds. We'll probably be able to sort it out in a little while, but right now things have been quite difficult. So yeah, I will just leave you with that. Hope you've had a good night, and I hope I've managed to actually entertain you. And yeah, we can pick up this next story later, like tomorrow or evening, perhaps. Well, potentially we'll have finished this entire collection on stream. We'll see. So yeah. So as I'm saying, I hope you were entertained, and I hope I entertained you, and that you were able to. Well, I was able to follow along my narration. I believe I stumbled a bit over the Xélucha, but on the other hand, I did enjoy reading it out, at least the first half of it, the one that was a bit more openly. I think, well, okay, maybe I can still read the next story from this collection. I'm just going to check how long it is. What? What are you talking about? Sorry, what? What is this? There we go. Sorry, I've posted. I messed up the link. Let me just have a little bit of a look to see. This next one is around 20 pages. So, oh, what the hell? We have more people. I guess I can give that a bit of a go. I'm just going to print. So this one is The Dream of Jacques the Anarchist. Jacques was not a handsome man. As a matter of fact, in looks, he was so repulsive that many of the Grand Dames de Beau Monet de Paris, I don't know how to pronounce that, so that was a bit of a stab in the dark, would gather up their silken skirts and turn their painted and powdered faces away from him as he occasionally passed them on one of the boulevards of the gayest city of the continent of Europe, ejaculating as they did so, "What a horrible-looking man!" Even his companions in his own rank of life looked upon him with distant repellence, as though they also were only compelled by the exigencies of necessity to tolerate his company, whilst at the same time they looked up to him, and sought his advice merely because his powers in the way of vice and cunning were greater than their own. Again, little children, and it had been truly said that children seldom make mistakes in their judgment of human character, even they shunned him, and would run away from him as soon as they caught sight of him. Looking upon these circumstances, can you wonder that Jacques had a morose, vicious nature, and harboured the direst hatred against all mankind? No one seemed to know Jacques' second name. Perchance if you had asked him, he could not have told you himself. So long was it since he had last heard it. He came and went, he existed, nothing more. No one loved him, no one cared for him, no one asked how he lived, where he lived, or what he lived on. He was there, that was sufficient. And because he was there, they tolerated him. Therefore, as has already been remarked, it cannot be a matter for surprise that Jacques was a morose, hatred-loving individual who scowled at everyone he met and harboured a bitter resentment in his heart against every man, woman, and child with whom he came in contact. Born in the lowest slums of Paris, never having known his parents, who probably were quite as vicious as he had now become, he had existed and grown up among all the vices, wickednesses, and profanities of the lowest places that the world can shew. Never having had opportunities of knowing right from wrong, his highest ideal in life was either to get drunk or to rob somebody, and if that somebody would not consent to be robbed without demur, Jacques would think nothing of sticking a knife into that person and robbing him when dead. This, then, is the character of the man whom everybody knew as Jacques. To sum up the description in the fewest possible words possible, he was simply one of the many gamins who infest the streets of Paris. A small man, Jacques, slightly built, with sloping shoulders, bowed legs, large feet, great length of arm, great depth of chest, sinewy fingers, always restlessly moving, twinning, and entwining themselves in one another, and seemingly made to press the life out of some human creature's throat. He had the face of an animal, long narrow eyes overhung with thick eyebrows, low forehead, over which his matted hair grew in unkempt, uncared for abundance, a cruel mouth framed in thin lips, teeth the colour of ebony, projecting ears, and a general look of vice and cunning, which would have made a superstitious person tremble at the sight of him. His face does not belie his character, for in the way of cunning, malice, and all uncharitableness, neither Paris nor any other city on the continent of Europe could by any chance shew such an example as Jacques. His dress had evidently done duty for many a year, and consisted of the filthy blouse once blue, but which had now lost its colour through dirt, patches, and age. Loose baggy trousers that had probably belonged at some remote period of time to some soldier of the army of France, and a round skull cap completed his outfit. On rainy days, Jacques would appear in a battered old coat, bought no doubt at one of the numerous second-hand clothes shops, which specially cater for villains of this description, and which had previously belonged to some convict. Such is the man in his entirety. He never alters, never seems to have illness, constantly disappears for together, reappearing suddenly from no one knows where, neither do they know anyone has been engaged during the interval. Jacques sometimes appears to have plenty of money after one of these disappearances, and could the tale be told or forced from him, probably it would be that of some ghastly murder, upon the result of which Jacques feeds for days together. Of course, it goes without saying that Jacques is well known to the police, who, for that matter, have tabulated, by means of their far-reaching methods, the character, life, and antecedents of every questionable person in Paris. But strange to say, Jacques had been able to the present to steer clear of their wonderful knowledge, and though often suspected, has never had anything absolutely proved against him. The police, nevertheless, are fully aware of that Jacques is an anarchist, and a typical anarchist is Jacques. Such a man, one is tempted to think of, is put into the world to become one of these unreasoning fanatics. His hatred of mankind, fostered by constant brooding, intensifies the belief that destruction of life and property is the only means by which the world can be improved, and Jacques, with his almost devilish cunning, is a man of much use to and greatly trusted by the great ones of the anarchist cause. Is there a dangerous mission to be performed, demanding forethought, courage, and promptitude? Jacques is the man employed. Is there a cowardly murder to be performed either by strangulation or the knife? Jacques is the man told off to do it. Is there some public building to be destroyed either by bomb or other infernal machine? Jacques is the man told off to procure, fix, or to throw it. His knowledge of chemistry, picked up no one knows how or where, is positively marvelous. He seems to have a genius for the concoction of explosives, and many of his infernal machines are characterized by fiendish ingenuity worthy of far better application. Would that Jacques were engaged in unravelling the mysteries and the doings of the cause which he so eagerly and earnestly supports, for then, owing to his intricate knowledge of their system of working, they would stand but a poor chance of doing half the damage they at present bring about. Here we have provided a sketch of the man, his methods, and his way of living. Now for an incident in his checkered career. It is a lonely morning in the middle of summer, and Paris is at the height of gaiety. A brilliant crowd throngs the boulevards. The roll of the carriages containing men and women of fashion is continuous. Multitudes of foot passengers, gaily dressed, move swiftly to and fro along the broad pavement, under the spreading trees, which, being in full bloom, afford a grateful shelter from the glare and heat of the sun. The cafes are doing a roaring business, and the laughter and chatter of the countless light-hearted people rise upon the summer air. In and out of this brilliant throng shuffles our friend Jacques, hand thrust deep into his pockets, cap slouched over his eyes, shoulders bent, and his eyes upon the ground, though a close observer would at once discern that those keen eyes take in every detail, no matter how slight, of what is passing around him. He moves with a sort of sliding motion, passing swiftly yet silently along, seeming out of place in such a brilliant world, for when any chance passer-by does catch sight of him, that passer-by instantly away from him as though in fear, thereby causing Jacques to emit a peculiar snarl of hate which comes from between his tightly clenched teeth. In his mind the slightest incident remains fixed, and he broods over almost imaginary trifles which to his morbid fancy assume gigantic proportions. Consequently, his hatred, as day succeeds day, only grows in its intensity, making him long to set the world on fire by the performance of some ghastly tragedy which shall shake it to its uttermost parts. As he pauses to look at a flower stall radiant with beautiful and costly flowers, a man, very shabbily dressed, comes swiftly towards him, and as he passes, touches him lightly on the shoulder, doing it so quickly that no one, not even the closest observer, could tell but that it was an accident. whispering at the same time some unintelligible word or two into his ear which makes Jacques start slightly. Almost instantly he recovers his composure and in a minute or two passes onward as though nothing had occurred. But his mind, hitherto bent only on his own imaginary wrongs, has been at once transformed into a swiftly working, cunning machine by the simple action here described. The man who passed him is an agent of a secret society sent by them to summon their trusty instrument instantly to their aid. Jacques knows that the heads of the society will even now be awaiting him, having probably concocted and brought to a head some diabolical scheme or other for the supposed improvement of this benighted world. Accordingly, his pace becomes quicker and quicker, being very gradually increased so as not to call the attention of any spy who might by chance be watching him, till at length he disengages himself from the gay throng, and turning down a side street, threads for many minutes street after street, and slum after slum, till arriving at last in the lowest part of the city, he disappears down an entry and is lost to sight. Let us follow him. Coming to the end of the entry, which is inches deep in slime, he mounts some rickety stairs, and arrives before a closed door. He turns the handle, it is locked. He knocks, and when a voice inquires, "Who is there?" "It is I, Jacques," is the response. "The countersign," replied the voice. "Destruction," mutters Jacques in a terrible voice. Whereupon the door is instantly opened, and he enters upon a small and dilapidated room with a wooden table in the centre, round which some 5 men, as disreputable as himself, are seated, a spluttering candle in their midst, and a black bottle together with some half-dozen glasses to keep them company. They are engaged in earnest conversation as he enters, and a murmur of approbation at his prompt appearance passes between them as he takes seat at the table. Hardly a word is spoken to him, save that one of the men, evidently the chief of the gang, looks him in the face and asks him in a subdued and impressive, "Jacques, are you ready for dangerous work?" "I am," responds he shortly. "It will be the most difficult task we have yet seen you," goes on the chief. "That means naught," interrupts Jacques, "as long as it is the riddance from the world of some useless tyrant." This in a voice repugnant with hatred and malice. "So be it," responds the other. "It is time for the removal of—" He pulls Jacques towards him and whispers some great name into his expectant ear. Whereupon Jacques' eyes light up with a baleful fire, sparkling in glee at the very thought of the work before him, which look bodes ill with the person whose name has just been communicated to him. After whispering for a minute or so, the chief goes on, Can we rely upon you?" To which Jacques replies emphatically, Tomorrow night he will have ceased to breathe." Whereupon his chief produces 2 articles, the one a dagger, the other a small iron case, handing them silently to Jacques, saying as he does so, "Swear." Then Jacques proceeds to enunciate some terrible oath, evidently most binding to the community, for he pronounces it in a tone of unusual solemnity for one of his character. And then, after indulging in a drink from the black bottle, he turns and leaves the room, departing as silently as he came. Through slum after slum he threads his way, till at last he arrives at the miserable squalid hovel which he calls his home. After depositing the articles he has received carefully in a secret hiding place, Jacques goes out again, and for the rest of the day wanders restlessly up and down the boulevards, pondering in his evil mind the best method of carrying out with success the mission entrusted to him, returning to the one small room occupied and throwing himself still dressed onto the heap of straw which does duty for a bed, at once goes off to sleep, seemingly unmindful of the act upon the morrow. For he sleeps soundly, nothing disturbing the tranquillity of his rest. Then suddenly he moves uneasily, and from the recesses of his mind, or from Hades, there comes, which in its extraordinary vividness seems to be which in its extraordinary vividness seems to his excited imagination absolutely real. He fancies himself summoned by the Council of Five, and sees himself holding an earnest consultation with them, which, by the grave look upon their faces, they evidently deem most important. The scene changes. Now he is in his own room, bending over a huge crucible, whilst around him stand many bottles of curious shape and forms in plentiful array, and from the crucible there arises a thick and white smoke, and a pungent hail his nostrils. Sorry, I'm just going to check the chat. Thank you. I didn't notice your comment until now. I'm sorry. Well, it's more. I would like to do that, but I have this thing where for example, I stumble across my words. Sometimes, for example, I have a great difficulty in saying a couple of words like peculiarly or originally. Sometimes is a bit of an issue, and there's one word that I always. Now I can't remember. I always give. Oh yeah. Oddly enough, the word visiting, when put in a sentence, goes to. I don't really know. I do. There was one word specifically I remember that is always an issue when said in a sentence, but I can't remember what it is now. Anyway, I'm going to continue. I'm just checking this to see that. 171. Okay, 171. Okay. Wait. Okay. Hour after hour, he appears to stand there, adding chemical after chemical to the mixture already in the crucible, and in his mind there seems to be an exulting triumph over his new and wonderful discovery, which is destined in his imagination to revolutionize the world. Again, the scene has changed. He sees himself together with his 5 comrades. In a field upon the outskirts of Paris, a carriage stands in the field, out of which a curious contrivance of wires and springs and canvas is brought silently and rapidly by his companions in the deed. Then he sees a curiously constructed aerial machine gradually inflate itself with the gas provided for the purpose, till at length it is ready to take its flight into the air. He notes that it is a broad daylight, and vaguely wonders how it is that no one observes them. However, all this passes from his mind as he takes his place in the machine and rises rapidly into the air, whilst underneath the contrivance a huge black bag is held by a single cord, containing an enormous quantity of the wonderful explosive he had seen himself concocting in his own room some hours previously. He hears the jeering laughter of his companions, who all doubt the success of his invention, following him as he rises higher and higher, till at last it dies away into silence as he passes out of earshot. As his curious contrivance carries him rapidly along, its course seeming to be completely under his control by some newly discovered means, he hastily reviews the incidents leading up to his curious situation, and by some subtle power his mind grasps the fact that for the moment he is living some years hence. Europe is agitated by a mighty war, in which with unrestrained bitterness all the civilized nations are engaged. To his mind it seems that France, allied with Russia, is engaged in making war upon the other great nations, and up to this time has met with but varying success. The anarchists as a body seem to him at this time to hold the world in their grasp, but up to this moment have stood aloof from the contest. Then the French anarchists, seeing their country losing ground in the war, have determined to steal a march upon their fraternity, who belong to other nations, and have employed Jacques, whose knowledge of their ways and means seems in the interval of the years to have greatly increased, till at last they have come to rely upon him almost implicitly to strike a decisive blow which shall settle the fate of the war at one dread sweep. Their plans had already been laid and had been communicated to Jacques, but a brilliant idea having been conceived by him and having been brought by him to seeming perfection, he lays it with much confidence and pride before his leaders. Then he sees himself laughed to scorn. He sees himself grow angry. He hears himself refuse to carry out their schemes unless they employ his methods. He sees them grow pale at his threat, for is he not their only hope? Is it not his cunning and his courage what they most rely on? So at last he hears them consent to allow him to carry out the plan by means of his new invention, whereupon he now finds himself in the excited imaginings of his overwrought brain flying in mid-air, he cannot tell precisely in what, toward the scene of the seat of war. It is midday, and he passes over the country with extraordinary rapidity. At last he hears the sounds of cannon and of musketry. He sees the fair country devastated by the effects of war, and at last comes in sight of the rolling clouds of smoke caused by the artillery of two mighty armies engaged in fiercest battle. He distinguishes the colours of his country's host and glories in their glory. He distinguishes the duller uniforms of his country's enemies, and grinds his teeth in impotent rage as he notices how gradually but surely they are gaining the mastery. By a single movement of his hand, he seems to stay the course of his aerial machine exactly over the enemy's host. His heart beats tumultuously, almost suffocating him in its rapid pulsations. Will his great idea accomplish his purpose? Will the marvellous explosive he had discovered by years of toil do its appointed work? Will he become great in the annals of his country and of the world by performing a deed which shall shake the world to its foundations? Will he render to his country, though by awful means involving as they do a nation's destruction, a signal service? Will his comrades, now uneasily awaiting the result in Paris, receive him with open arms as the glorious hero of their cause? Or will they, in the event of his failure, detail one of their dreaded agents to track his footsteps until he eventually dies a traitor's death? If he fails, let it be so. He cares not. If he succeeds, the nations of the world rise in horror and annihilate the anarchists as a pest of civilization. He cares not. At least he will have avenged himself on mankind. He at least will have drunk his fill of human blood, and will have killed his thousands and his tens of thousands, and in their death will have slain his hatred and satisfied the longings of his soul. For the rest he cares not. These thoughts rush in a through his excited brain, and as he produces his knife wherewith to cut the cord at the end of which hangs the means of doing all he requires, his hands become steadier by reason of his desperate purpose, and he notices with exulting glee that his machine stands exactly over the centre of his country's enemies' vast array. The knife gleams in the air, then falls, the rope is severed, and for a second a sickening sense of awful expectancy swells in his overheated brain. A moment hardly measured by time elapses, then the sound of the guns ceases. He looks down, trembling and afraid. A joyful cry escapes his lips. He has succeeded, he has conquered. The host of the enemies of his country has disappeared. Not a sign or sound has betokened the coming of his terrible machine. Silently it has fallen upon the unsuspecting men. Sorry, I have to check. I need to make a response. Okay, now I'm going to just check the chat real quick. I can try that. Thing is, just to clarify, sometimes the 3 to 4 minute videos I make, they sometimes can take about 2 hours or more to record, simply because, for example, I do a lot of unintentional lip smacks or clicks, imperceivable when I'm speaking, but the microphone happens to pick them up, and I use an actual recording microphone for that. I don't know how it would sound if I just used the onboard mic to record an entire audiobook. I don't know. Well, I would have to think about that. Anyway, it exploded and done its awful work in the war was a living, breathing being now lives. Upon the ground or piled in fearful heaps in all attitudes and postures, mangled and shattered, a mass of mutilated remains destroyed as by a magic hand. His country's armies amazed, lost in wonder, unable to account for the dreadful carnage wrought amongst their enemies so suddenly. His machine entirely escapes their notice in the general astonishment and horror, and the occurrence remains for the present enshrouded in absolute mystery. In the confusion which reigns supreme, Jacques notes from his high position that a few men detach themselves from the French army and hasten with all speed in the direction of Paris to carry the news of the enemy's destruction to the capital. In a few hours, France, nay more, the world will be electrified by the awful news. Men will stand aghast at the fearful power let loose so suddenly in their very midst. They will tremble in unknown agony at the power displayed by its hitherto despised foes, the anarchists. He thinks exultingly of all these things. He thinks that now he can rule the world, that now he can dispense unchecked his own ideas, that now he can avenge himself to his heart's content upon all mankind. His brain reels at the mighty possibilities and the thoughts which overwhelm it. He is a new man. No longer is he Jacques the anarchist, but Jacques the ruler of the world. The scene again is changed. In his dream he sees himself once more climbing the dark, rickety stairs of the house in the black slum. Again he sees himself in the dilapidated room. The same 5 men who had helped him to start on his mission of destruction are seated around the table. All Paris, all France, all the world is rising with the awful news. A conquering army, glorying in its strength one moment, is converted into a mangled heap of blood-bespattered fragments in the next. Not a sound is heard, not a sign to show the cause. Can we wonder that the world stands aghast and trembling at the dread occurrence? Can we wonder that the same world stands in fear of such a dire event? What will this body of men whom the world calls anarchists do next? A new power is introduced by them into our midst, by which a nation almost might be murdered in an instant without a sign or sound. Exterminate them, you say. How? Truly, it is terrible. As Jacques enters the room, his with joyful faces and with open arms, reveling in fiendish glee over their unexpected success. They boast, they rave, they go mad with exultation. They say what they will do. They detail how they will change the world. Minutes pass, and Jacques is totally ignored. At last he speaks. He asks what his reward is to be. They only laugh at him. They revile him. They tell him that in another moment he will have followed in the footsteps of the men he had already murdered. They approach him. He retreats. One of their number swiftly attempts to close the door. Jacques moves backwards. He gains the aperture, and one more step and he is through it. Then he calls aloud in the intensity of his anger, "Ungrateful wretches! With my help you might have done anything. Without me you can do nothing. Follow in the footsteps of the men whose fate you have helped to bring to pass." He raises his hand, withdrawing it suddenly from his pocket. A pearly white powder spreads itself through the room. A mighty concussion instantly occurs, as though compressed air were let loose with enormous force. The roof falls in upon the 5 luckless conspirators, and Jacques, as he rushes hurriedly from the scene down the rickety stairs, narrowly escapes destruction in the mass falling debris. Then all becomes blank. He stirs in his sleep, gives a smothered cry, and wakes in a cold sweat, lying for many minutes dazed and terror-stricken at the very vividness of his awful dream. The struggling rays of early morning filter timidly through the dirt of the panes of glass in the small window of his miserable room. He rises slowly, still dazed by his vision of the night. Then the memory of what he has to do today comes forcibly into his mind. Bitterly he curses fate because his dream is only a dream and not a reality. Would that he had but 1/2 ounce of that marvellous powder he had dreamt about, and his work of today would be but play. Then turning his mind in the whirl, and deepest hatred surging in his heart, he departs from his miserable room to discharge into eternity one soul, instead of the countless thousands which in his dream he had imagined as already sent there by his relentless hand. So that's that one. Now then, let's see. How many pages is that? Hold on a second. I am slightly tempted to read the last one as well. So 144. I'm just going to quickly check something. Hold on. Oh yes, well I can. I'm just going to very quickly 27. We'll just do that one as well. Cool. So let's do it then. The last story in the collection, and we will finish this work. But upon I might actually be able to do a video on it tomorrow. But that doesn't mean I wouldn't do a stream either. I will think about it. So we have the coming of the spirit of Meshkoet, the Israelite. The professor sat in his revolving, sumptuously upholstered library chair, his cheek resting upon his hand, his elbow on the arm of the chair, and a book which to his mind was evidently intensely interesting reposed on his one knee, which was crossed over the other in order to form a convenient rest. The room in which the professor sat was an extremely comfortable one, and one that to a man of literary tastes would appear typically and perfectly equipped for the requirements of the student. Upon its floor was a magnificent Turkey carpet, subdued in colour and of intricate design, into which the foot sank deeply as one walked. The walls upon 3 sides of the room were hidden by tall black oaken bookcases, exquisitely carved, which extended to a considerable height above the floor, and which were crammed with handsomely bound volumes of all colours and sizes, many of which were of priceless worth, owing to their great age and rarity. At the first glance, it would have appeared that the room had no exit, as even the door was covered with the all-prevailing bookcases, and the arrangement created in one's mind when within the apartment the impression that one was far removed from the cares and troubles of the outside world, and at once plunged into the realms of thought and genius. Above the bookcases, between their tops and the ceiling, the walls were further hidden by a beautifully carved in oak and a shade lighter than that of which the bookcases were fashioned. In many places, this fresco depicted subjects of the Greece and Rome, culled from the highest classics and executed with a wonderful attention as to detail and with the skill of a master hand. At intervals, around the room and standing on the narrow shelf formed by the tops of the bookcases stood 5 white marble busts of all the most famous authors that the world had known, from those of the most ancient times down to those of recent years. Upon one side of the room, which was oblong in form, stood a curiously formed writing table of polished wood inlaid with brass, upon which fantastically shaped, though massive lamp, with a rose-coloured shade, occupied a prominent position, this being the only means by which the room could be illuminated at night. At the present moment, the table was covered with papers, manuscripts, and volumes innumerable, as though the professor had only just completed his researches and notes into and upon some particularly abstruse subject. At one end of the room, in the only position unoccupied by books, save where the window claimed a space, was the fireplace, an extremely curious arrangement built far back into the thickness of the wall, as are the fireplaces of many an ancient English homestead, but from which the fire, when ablaze, threw out a pleasant warmth and brilliant circle of ruddy light. The sides of this fireplace were decorated with richly coloured tiles, also depicting scenes from the Grecian mythology, and the hearth was inlaid with a costly mosaic representing Atlas supporting the world upon his shoulders. Over the fireplace was a splendid mantelpiece and overmantel fashioned of oak, black with age and carved with marvellous skill to represent the four seasons. And in the centre of this overmantel a large plate-glass mirror was inserted, which reflected the images of the books that lie in the opposite end of this splendidly appointed study. Just going to check the chat again. And yeah, I remembered, yes, it is the word visited. When I'm narrating something, the word is sometimes almost impossible to say, because I say visited. It's like it's so hard to make it come out the way it should be. I just remembered for real that was the thing. It's just when I say it in isolation. That's just to clarify what I was saying before. So to continue. A globe set upon 3 legs in order that it might revolve occupied one corner of the room, and it was evident from the presence of this piece of furniture that the professor was fond of and indulged in the study of the geography of our world. A statue of almost priceless worth representing Venus de Milo. A statue of almost priceless worth representing Venus de Milo occupied another corner, and a rare picture or two, choice in subject and signed with the names of the greatest masters of the world of art, occupied positions upon easels in various parts of the room. Truly might the occupant of this apartment be proud of its possession. At the present moment, however, as has already been related, the professor sat, absorbed in the contents of his book, in his comfortable chair, which he had moved from its accustomed position by the table and placed before the fire, which crackled merrily in the old-fashioned grate, throwing out a warm, bright circle of light that illuminated the whole room with a red glow, throwing into strong relief all its sumptuous appointments, and casting sombre shadows onto the finely painted ceiling that chased one another to and fro over its broad surface, till they finally passed away into the comparative dark. The lamp was lit, and threw a subdued rosy glow over the shoulder onto his book, at the same time tinged grey hair with its soft light. A tall, spare man was the professor, with sallow physique which showed that for many years at least he had been a man of sedentary habits. Almost the only redeeming feature about him was his eyes, which were large and dark, full of fire and determination, and these were surmounted by somewhat thick eyebrows, which had, like his hair, become grey. He was dressed in a suit of dark grey tweed, and sat leaning comfortably back in his chair. His cheek rested on his hand, his elbow upon the arm of the chair, and his book upon his one knee, which was thrown over the other for that purpose. Suddenly he altered his position, and holding the book up nearer to his eyes as his interest in its contents deepened, he threw out his legs to their full extent, crossing his ankles as he did so. Page after page the professor turned, his interest deepening and ever deepening with every line he read. If we could have looked over his shoulder, we should have seen that the pages of the volume were yellow with age, and inscribed in a character undecipherable to eyes unaccustomed to their strange form. It was a book which the professor had sent to. It was a book which had been sent to the professor by one of his literary friends, as a present, and was to him, at any rate, of priceless worth, being the only copy of that particular work in the world, and the story which was set forth in its ancient pages was perhaps one of the most fascinating, thrilling, and pitiable that the world can show, being in point of fact the history of the children of Israel during the time of their bondage under Pharaoh, king of Egypt. This history had been written slowly and secretly by one of their rabbis in the last years of their enforced slavery, and no doubt to a man of the professor's mind, knowledge, and intellect, it was a book of absorbing interest, both from the nature of the story it contained and from its great age. Who was the professor, do you ask? That was better known to the professor himself than to anyone else. The people of his neighborhood knew little or nothing about him, and when the people of a small residential place do not know who their neighbors are and what their business is, the casual inquirer stands but a very small chance of acquiring any knowledge concerning that person. He had come to the little village of L some years before, and had taken up his abode in a gambling old house yclept the Grange, furnished it in sumptuous style, being evidently a man of means, and from that time forth had lived there in solitary state, waited upon by a prim, acid-tempered housekeeper, who well knew how to keep her own counsel, and by an elderly man who combined the duties of valet and butler in one. These two together, with one or two other servants, sufficed to minister to the professor's needs. As to who he was, where he came from, how he occupied his time, or any other inquisitive information of any kind whatever, was beyond the power of the people of L to impart. He lived to himself and by himself, keeping in his own counsel, never visiting anyone nor being visited by them, and for that matter might have died without attracting any more than a passing interest. Sometimes he took long walks, but always by himself, and at others he was absent from the Grange for days or weeks at a time. But he came and went as he liked, and no one was any the wiser, for the people of L had long ago found out to their cost that it was a perfectly hopeless task to attempt to discover that information from any of his servants, who were all devoted to him. Sorry, I'm checking the messages again. I'm trying. It's just to explain, when I'm reading something, I'm always fighting with this, because I'm a speed reader. So I'm always fighting with this over-mastering urge to read the words as quickly as possible, to the point where they kind of just merge together. So that's kind of an issue. There's a lot. So, sorry. The name of this strange man is a matter of no moment to anyone. In fact, knowing that he would much rather have it kept secret than given to the world, and as he has long since departed this life, I do not consider it necessary here to disclose it. He was a man of marvellous intellect, which was stored with a vast variety of knowledge, comprising subjects too numerous to mention. A magnificent mathematician, splendid classical scholar, having the languages of the ancient world at his finger ends, the professor was a man much respected in literary circles, and had long since found out that his time could be so profitably passed amid the books that he had no occasion to rely for amusement upon his surrounding neighbours, who were for the most part narrow-minded, mean people with an aptitude for minding other people's affairs rather than their own, and on that account they did not appeal to this man, whose mind and methods of thought were far above the ordinary run of the everyday. But despite all his vast knowledge, from whatever source obtained, strange to say, the professor had a profound contempt for the religions of the world. He believed in no religion whatever. He had investigated them all, it is true, had carefully studied their various doctrines from every point of view, but neither Christianity, Buddhism, Mahometanism, spiritualism, or any other ism had the power to impress or carry conviction to a mind of the capacity and reasoning power of his own. He did not scorn religion generally, but simply took no notice of it. He had never taken the trouble to inquire into the nature of his future state, and perhaps had he done so, he would have been inclined to believe with the ancient Greeks that mortals drink of the river Lethe, and spend their eternity amidst a grandly luxurious, all-satisfying paradise so constituted as to meet the requirements of each individual soul. Not that the professor was by any means a happy man. He was not. His mind, although possessing a profound insight into the wonders of the world as to learning, etc., yet harboured a vague, uneasy feeling that he was never satisfied. Maybe the professor was one of the many who long for the touch of a vanished hand, for the soul of a voice that is still. For the sound of a voice that is still. Who can say? Deep down in his own deep heart, this knowledge was hidden away, and in all probability the grave will ultimately close over him without any information upon this point being forthcoming. I thought you said he was already dead. Well, okay. And if by chance anyone could have peered into the recess of the professor's mind, they would have found there supreme indifference as to the nature of his future existence beyond the tomb, except perhaps that he had a vague undefined longing to meet someone in that shadowy land whom he had known in his earlier years. So much for the professor's thoughts and ways. The ornamental clock upon the mantelpiece ticks stolidly, rhythmically, and sonorously away. Silence reigned in the room, save for the sound of its regular movements and the crackling of the bright wood fire. Outside, the wind moaned with a weird, soft sound around the gables of the old house. For an hour, maybe, this state of things continued. Then the professor closed his book suddenly and arose from his chair. Stretching himself to his full height and extending his arms on either side, he heaved a big sigh, then crossed the room, moving noiselessly over the thick pile of the rich carpet to the window, and pulling aside the deep red curtains which were drawn closely over it, he looked out into the night. Sorry, I have a message. In the immediate foreground was darkness, then came the outlines of some trees, tall, gaunt, and black, their every twig and branch clearly defined against a sky of deepest azure. Low down the far horizon sailed the moon, looking large and near and silvery as she hung in the twilight sky, and now and then a white fleecy cloud sped swiftly across her face, and the vast blue vault of heaven was studded with countless twinkling stars, whilst here and there a far distant planet shone serenely in golden splendour as it hung in the depths of space. A slight wind swayed the trees to and fro in its passage, making their branches look like ghostly fingers waving the observer to the azure vastness of the far away. Waving the observer to the azure vastness of the far away. It was not an inviting night, yet not a repulsive one, but all the same the professor was thankful for the comfortable, subduedly lit, warm room in which he stood, and letting the curtains fall to once more, thus shutting out the grand scheme he had gazed upon, he turned to go back to his chair. As he did so, a smothered cry escaped his lips, and he staggered back, clutching the table for support, as well he might, for the sight which met his gaze caused the grey hairs upon his head to stiffen in sudden fear. There before him stood a man, and yet not a man. Rather was it a shape or spirit, and though seemingly of flesh and blood, yet the professor could dimly see through its body the books at its back. But despite this fact, the figure was both a commanding one and an interesting one. It was that of a man who, as his dress indicated, had lived in a far back period of the world's history, and who was, as his countenance shewed, evidently of Jewish extraction. He was tall, broad, and well-formed, and was clothed in a sort of toga which fell in picturesque folds around him. This garment was of a deep purple hue, and fell gracefully across his body, leaving his left shoulder bare, and exposing his left leg from the knee downwards. Oh, hello there. Because I'm reading. The shoulder, arm, and leg thus displayed were of a deep brown colour, as though they had been exposed for many days to the heat of a burning sun, and his face, which was an extremely handsome one, was of a still browner hue than his limbs. His coal-black eyes burned with an electric fire beneath his still blacker eyebrows, and had in them a look of pathetic sadness pitiful to see. His nose was of the Roman type, and his long jet-black hair fell in dishevelled masses onto his neck, and he stood there, or rather rested upon, the floor, motionless in an attitude as of waiting. The professor did not speak, neither did the shape, but each did the other in solemn silence. After the lapse of a few minutes, the professor managed to totter round the table to his chair, into which he threw himself, beads of perspiration standing upon his forehead, and half turning himself in it so as to bring his body sideways to the spirit, he stole another glance. He stole another glance at it. Then the shape spoke, and its voice was deep and musical. "Why fearest thou, O man?" said the shape. "I have not come to harm thee. I have come because thy brain was more powerful than my brain, and thy will than my will. And moreover, the reading of the book thou hast just laid down has called me from the realms of space through which I ceaselessly wander, and it has been given me by the power who rules the universe, to visit thee for a few short moments. To speak for a little space the strange new tongue which thou speakest, to understand some of the thoughts which thou thinkest. Thy learning is deep and broad and wonderful, O man. Thou comprehends much of the ancient things of time. The book thou hast been reading, perchance thou disbelievest it. I perceive thou dost. Yet why shouldst thou not believe it when that great book, the Bible, proved it to be true? And even now thou dost see in me, O man, yet a further proof of it. When I last walked the earth, men knew me, or rather some men did, by the name of Meshkoeth the Israelite. The professor moved uneasily in his chair and bowed his head upon his hand. After a short time the shape went on, "O man, I see again the scenes which once I saw, and which I can never forget. The burning plain, the brilliant sun, the Egyptian taskmaster and his cruel whip, the places where we lay by night, the places where we worked by day. I see afar off a mighty city. I feel once more the taskmaster's whip. I see myself once more eating my very life out in the making of bricks for the accursed Pharaoh. I feel once more the hopeless agony of it all. I feel myself once more wondering how I could believe in the protecting care of a great Jehovah amidst the burning anguish of my awful lot. I hear again, how distinctly, the sweet-voiced Jewish women singing songs as they slave at their task of bringing straw for their husbands' use. I hear them sing even as the lash falls mercilessly across their bare shoulders. I hear them bless their Lord for the trials he has put upon them. I would that I had only done the same, for then would I be where now they are, instead of being a wandering outcast spirit doomed for the everlasting torment of remorse. Ah, thou man who sittest there, thyself untouched by care, unheeding worldly things, little canst thou know the agony of my days. From early morn till late at eve I slaved with the red clay, forming and fashioning it into the bricks wherewith great Pharaoh built his mighty cities, and made the Egypt of his day the foremost nation of the then world. Day after day was it the same old tale, labour, without ceasing and without end, and at night the weary pillow of a worn-out body was the hard cold earth, on which I lay beneath a scanty covering, trying in vain to snatch a few hours of troubled rest, ere the dawn of another day arrived, bringing with it renewed toil. And yet was a man expected to bear his trials silently, to do as his appointed task diligently, oft times under the lash of a cruel taskmaster, and through it all was he to bless the great Jehovah, the omnipotent and all-powerful, though he permitted such things to happen to his chosen people. Verily was this a mighty exercise of fate. And yet, O man, in the midst of all these things, I had one ray of ineffable light. I loved and was beloved. The girl I loved and who loved me was called Zanoah, and while she lived, she was the one gleam of sunshine in my awful existence. Ah, how I loved her! Methinks, O man, that in thy far-off youth a girl once loved thee as Zanoah loved me. Ah, I mistake it not. That sigh, thine eyes reveal the truth. Then feel for me, O man, who sittest there listening to my tale. I need not trouble to describe my love to thee. Suffice it to say that she was beautiful as only a Hebrew maiden can be beautiful. Nor need I tell thee how I came to know her. Sufficient is it that she was told off by a common taskmaster to gather straw wherewith I might make bricks. What wonder was it that in our mutual affliction I should love her, and then she should return my love? It made our task the easier as we thought of it, though we both well knew that it was hopeless. Oft times when I lost heart she cheered me. Oft times when I almost cursed my God, she sang to me grand thoughts sent from the realms of peace. But one dread day, I remember it all too well, the Egyptian taskmaster had driven me well nigh to madness. In my frenzy I cursed my God. I reviled the omnipotent whom I should have worshipped, and the horror of my people and of Zanoah, together with the greatness of the sin I had committed, well nigh broke my heart. In her agony at hearing me revile that greatest of all names, she passed too long in her work, and the taskmaster, just then coming along the line, cried out to her, calling her a revolting name, at the same time allowing his heavy lash to fall with cruel force upon her tender shoulders. I know not how it was, mayhap something had angered him, but in his rage he struck Zanoah time and again, nor did he cease until at last my love, my only hope, sank to the ground under his merciless blow, and exhorting me with a last breath to withdraw my words, gave up the ghost and departed to the promised land. Anger intense and awful filled my soul. Once more I cursed my God, the world, myself, my parents, and the day of my birth. Shrink not, O man. Maybe if thou hast come to the pass that I had come to, perchance wouldst thou have done the same. Then in my blind wrath I seized a brick which the heat of the sun had baked hard, and summoning all my strength I smote the Egyptian full between the eyes. Then he fell upon the ground dead, and a murmur of applause escaped the lips of the assembled Hebrews, who had but a moment before been standing horror-stricken at my blaspheming utterances. I stood dazed and shaken by my passion, noting what in my anger I had done. My wrath passed as quickly as it had come. Remorse filled my soul for the awful things I had said, and a sense of intolerable loss took possession of my heart as I gazed upon the still lovely features of my lost Zanoah. Then the Egyptian slave seized me and, hurrying me off to the torture chamber, speedily put an end to my miserable existence. I will not tell thee of the agonies I endured, nor will I tell thee where I found myself after I was dead. But, O thou man, for more than 2,000 years have I wandered, a lost spirit, through the endless spaces of the universe, across the paths of worlds which eternally roll on in the course appointed for them from the beginning, past millions upon millions of stars, which are all counted and named even as the hairs of thy head are numbered. Through the trackless spaces of nothingness am I doomed to wander, remorse in my heart, terror in my being, and the ever-present haunting knowledge that myself have I undone myself. Oft times I wander even unto the golden gates of paradise itself, and crouch in lowly abjectness before its portals. I hearken to the song of the hosts of angels borne dimly to my listening senses, and oft times I fancy that, with a wild, unsatisfied feeling, that I hear the sweet voice of my long-lost Zanoah rising high in the heavenly chorus. Then once more, through the spaces of the universe, past endless worlds, a million stars, and through ever-clinging vapours do I rush on, carried away by a mad desire to forget the thoughts that haunt my being. And, O man, thou canst not yet know the anguish, awfulness of the knowledge of the fact that through all eternity my sin shall follow me, and its hated presence haunt me until maybe in the far-off ages that are yet unborn the days of my atonement shall be accomplished, and then shall I once more see enshrined in heavenly brightness my long-lost Hebrew love. O man, in thy puny heart thou denouest religion. Thou believest not in it, even as I believed not in it long years ago. And though thou dost not blaspheme as I did, still art thou trembling on the brink. Man, man, remember, I have been permitted to visit thee and to warn thee. Take heed of thyself, take heed. Maybe thy years are numbered, maybe thy days are numbered, maybe it is even now too late. Repent therefore while there is yet time, and so avert my fate from becoming thine. Thou doubtest me, thy face telleth me so. Thou thinkest my presence and my words but the imaginings of thine own overheated brain. It is not so. I am here, my words are true. Believe me if thou canst, if not, thy future is of thine own making. Ah, sayest thou there is yet time? Methinks somewhere have I heard whispered as I passed down the halls of silence the awful sentence, thinkst thou there is yet time, O mortal, thou fool, this night shall thy soul be required of thee. Farewell. The professor looked up at as the shape ceased speaking, and his face was ashy pale. The spirit was no longer there. The room was empty. He passed his hand across his forehead with a weary of his memory. The clock ticked on, hour succeeded hour. The fire burned low, but the professor never moved. His forehead rested on his hand. His attitude was one of the most abject weariness. The lamp went out. Still he did not move. No one came to inquire the reason of such silence. The professor was a curious man, and his habits were well known to his servants.